Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Damalola Adekunle, the only son of the mighty Senator Chief Adekunle, lived in a world no one could truly understand, not even those who envied him. Born into luxury, raised in the corridors of power, and surrounded by security details, Dami was the poster child of political affluence. As a child, he wore tailored suits to primary school and was chauffeured in bulletproof SUVs. But behind the charm and carefully curated Instagram posts was a boy tormented by expectations, loss, and loneliness. His mother, the only person who truly loved him without agenda, died of a heart attack when he was 16. Since then, Dami had been slowly breaking. His father, a man obsessed with image and legacy, never recovered emotionally, but instead buried himself in politics, media, and other women. He saw Dami's tears as weakness and his grief as embarrassment. By the time Dami turned 18, he was already experimenting with cough syrup, rolling blunts in the family guest house, and sipping Hennessy like water. His addiction didn't happen overnight. It crept in like a thief, unnoticed, until it became the only thing that made him feel alive. Dami's life by 28 was a reflection of chaos, hidden behind a mask of privilege. His once vibrant eyes were now sunken, bloodshot, and surrounded by dark circles. His laughter, when it came, was hollow and sarcastic. He rented a 2-bedroom flat in Lekki Phase 1 that reeked of weed, smoke, and regret. The house was a mess of empty bottles, stained mattresses, crushed pill packs, and broken dreams. His circle had shrunk from fake elite friends to desperate drug dealers and girls who cared more about his ATM card than his well-being. Despite all this, Dami refused to change. The more people suggested rehab, the more resistant he became. He believed no one truly cared, and he saw every attempt to fix him as an insult. "Leave me alone. I didn't ask to be born into this madness," he'd scream at anyone who dared lecture him. When his father threatened to cut him off, Dami laughed and said he'd rather die in the gutter than become a puppet like him. He didn't care about his father's political aspirations. He didn't care about his surname. He didn't care about anything anymore. But what hurt the most, what truly killed him silently, was how much he hated himself. Dami couldn't look at himself in the mirror without seeing a failure. Not because of society's opinion, but because he knew, deep down, that he could have been something more. He had dreams once. He wanted to be a poet, a filmmaker, someone who used stories to change lives. But that version of himself was buried under years of pain, expectations, and rejection. He missed his mother. He missed the nights she would read psalms to him and pray over his head. But all that was gone now. In her place stood a cold, empty house, and a father who couldn't even remember his birthday. So Dami found comfort in codeine bottles, in the silence that came after 3 joints, in the fake euphoria of ecstasy pills. To the outside world, he was a senator's spoiled brat. But to himself, he was a prisoner, chained not by bars, but by demons only he could see. The night Dami landed in police custody, the headlines were brutal. Senator's son goes berserk in VIP lounge. He had smashed a bottle on a bartender's head for refusing to serve him more drinks after he already looked half dead. He had pushed a security guard and insulted everyone in sight. The videos were all over Twitter and Instagram within minutes, but what stung the most was not the public shame. It was that his father refused to come to his aid. While he lay in a filthy police cell, surrounded by body odor and insults from other detainees, his father was at a political rally in Kaduna, shaking hands and smiling for the cameras. Not a single call, not a single lawyer sent. For 48 hours, Dami stared at the peeling walls and swore that once he got out, he would cut every string connecting him to the Adekunle name. When his PA finally bailed him, the senator only sent a message: "You're dead to me if you don't clean up. I have a name to protect." That message was the final nail in Dami's emotional coffin. Dami moved back to Lekki and went on a rampage. He didn't care anymore. He partied for 7 nights straight. Slept with strangers he couldn't remember. Got high till his nose bled. Once, he overdosed and had a seizure on his bathroom floor. When he woke up in the hospital, he yanked out the drip and walked out shirtless. No one could control him, not the few friends who still tried, not his former teachers who cared, not even the security team his father paid to monitor him. They all quit after he threatened one of them with a kitchen knife. "If you come near me again, I'll stab you and plead insanity," he had said with a terrifying calmness. The media continued mocking him. Blogs started calling him the curse of Senator Adekunle. But Dami didn't care. In fact, he reposted the headlines with laughing emojis. That was his rebellion, his middle finger to a world that refused to understand him. But even in all this madness, a small, quiet part of him still wanted help, a whisper, a plea, buried beneath the noise. After his third near-death experience, he agreed to enter a private rehab in Ikoyi. At first, he played along, smiled during sessions, answered the right questions, and even quoted scriptures to the Christian therapist. But it was all a performance. In truth, the walls of the rehab center suffocated him. He wasn't ready to let go of his crutches, wasn't ready to face the pain naked. On the 63rd day, he escaped by sneaking into a delivery van leaving the compound. He disappeared into the night, free but more broken than ever. When his father heard, he blocked his account and left a voice note saying, "I wash my hands off you, Dami. I have no son." That night, Dami drank himself unconscious and dreamt of drowning in a river of purple cough syrup. When he woke up, he wished he hadn't. On the other side of Lagos, a different kind of suffering was unfolding. Ifeoma Okoye, 22 years old, stood in the blazing sun along the roadside at Oberland, selling steaming bowls of rice and stew from a tray barely balanced on a wooden table. Her face glistened with sweat, her swollen feet throbbed inside cheap slippers, and her belly, large and heavy with 9 months of pregnancy, strained under her gown. She had once dreamed of becoming a nurse, but life had different plans. After her father died in a car crash and her mother fell sick, she dropped out of school and came to Lagos to hustle. That's when she met Benga, a sweet talking mechanic with charming eyes and empty promises. He helped her find a place to stay, visited her every night, and whispered about marriage. But the moment she got pregnant, everything changed. Benga called her a liar, accused her of sleeping with his friends, and one day simply vanished. Phone switched off, house abandoned, dream shattered. With no one to turn to, Ife became a walking story of survival. Her mother had died 3 months into the pregnancy, and her only sibling was a 14-year-old brother back in the village who barely had food to eat. She couldn't go back home. The shame, the gossip, the judgment from neighbors. "You left school to follow man," they would say. So she stayed. Mama Iridi, an older woman who once took her in, had to send her away when her own husband complained about feeding another man's pregnant side chick. Ife ended up sleeping inside a kiosk behind the market. Some nights, mosquitoes kept her awake. Other nights, the fear of hoodlums creeping in made her cry until morning. She made just enough daily to eat once, and even then, she gave more to her unborn child than herself. Every time she touched her stomach, she whispered, "Don't worry, my baby. Mama is trying." One rainy evening, she stood in front of a closed shop, holding her tray with both hands, shielding it from the downpour as her own body got drenched. Her legs wobbled from exhaustion, but she stayed, hoping to sell just one more plate. A car sped past, splashing water all over her, and for a second, she wanted to scream, to break the tray, to just give up. But she didn't. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and kept standing. That night, she sold only one plate. She returned to the kiosk, soaked and shivering, and curled into herself on the cold floor. Her baby kicked, as if to comfort her. She rubbed her belly and whispered, "Please don't come tonight. I need to rest first." Unknown to her, fate was already writing a new chapter, one that would collide her life with a broken senator's son who had given up on himself. Their meeting would not be planned, rehearsed, or holy. It would be messy, loud, and powerful, just like life itself. The doctor's voice rang in Dami's ears long after he'd left the hospital. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, maybe 3 to 5 months with treatment, less without. He didn't respond. He simply stood there, staring into the mirror as if trying to find the man he used to be. But that man was long gone. Dami staggered out of the hospital with no emotion, as if his soul had clocked out and only his flesh remained. That night, he locked himself in his flat, unplugged his phones, and deleted his social media accounts. He wrote letters, one to his father, filled with venom, one to his childhood best friend, explaining nothing, and one to himself, raw and sorrowful. By morning, he wore a black hoodie, covered his eyes with sunglasses, and told his driver they were taking a ride. "Where to, sir?" the man asked. Dami simply muttered, "Third Mainland Bridge." No entourage, no police escort, just a black SUV moving quietly through Lagos traffic, while Dami prepared to end it all. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Maybe now they'll finally understand what it meant to be me." As they approached the long, sprawling expanse of the Third Mainland Bridge, something strange happened. Traffic. Heavy, bumper-to-bumper, immovable traffic. Dami hissed impatiently. He tapped his fingers on the leather seat and stared blankly out the tinted window. That was when he saw her, a heavily pregnant girl, soaked in sweat, dragging a tray of rice, stew, and empty plastic bottles across the sidewalk. She looked weak, as if the sun itself was punishing her. Then she suddenly staggered, clutched her side, and dropped to her knees. The few passers-by turned away. Some laughed, others walked past like she was invisible. Something shifted in Dami. He leaned forward. "Stop the car," he said. The driver blinked in confusion. "Sir." "I said stop the bloody car." Dami screamed. The driver slammed the brakes. His security aide from the passenger seat looked back. "Oga, a beg no step out. This area no be." Dami didn't let him finish. He opened the door, stepped into the traffic, and walked toward her. Ife was on her knees, one palm pressed to the ground, the other on her belly. She was dizzy, hungry, and the world was spinning. Her legs had given up. When she looked up and saw a man in black walking toward her, she thought she was hallucinating. He didn't look like a politician or a pastor, just a young man with tired eyes. Without a word, Dami knelt beside her, opened a bottle of water from the tray, and gently brought it to her lips. "Drink," he whispered. She hesitated, then obeyed. Her eyes were glassy. Her lips quivered. "Thank you," she muttered. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Because I have no choice," she replied. That response broke something in him. He stood up, reached into his wallet, and gave her N20,000. "This won't fix your life, but you need rest." He turned to leave, but something about her eyes stopped him. Without thinking, he called out, "What's your name?" She looked up slowly. "Ifeoma," she said. "But everyone calls me Ife." Dami nodded. "Okay, Ife. You're coming with me." The ride to the private clinic was silent. Ife sat on a towel in the back seat, barefoot and trembling, too shocked to say much. Dami kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She looked like someone life had beaten relentlessly, yet she still had a dignity about her, a quiet grace that even her tattered gown couldn't hide. He didn't ask her questions. He just sat there, silently fuming at a world that allowed a girl like that to suffer so deeply. When they arrived at the clinic in Lekki, he ordered the nurses to attend to her like they would a governor's daughter. Ife kept trying to explain herself, to say she couldn't afford anything, but Dami stopped her with a raised hand. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. As she was wheeled away, she looked back at him with tired, curious eyes. She didn't understand why a total stranger, clearly rich, clearly troubled, would help her. And neither did he. Hours later, Dami sat on a bench outside her ward, drinking malt for the first time in years. Something about this girl, her vulnerability, her honesty, had quieted the voices in his head. For the first time in forever, he wasn't thinking about dying. He was thinking about her. Not in a romantic sense, but in a deeply human way. What kind of pain had she endured to get here? What had her family done to her? Who was the bastard that abandoned her with a child in her womb? As the sun began to set, Ife stepped out of the ward, freshly bathed, wearing a donated hospital gown. She walked slowly toward him, her eyes puffy but calm. "You saved me," she said. "Twice. First with the money, then with your time. Most men don't even look at people like me." Dami smiled faintly. I'm not most men. And maybe you saved me too. They sat side by side in silence for over 20 minutes, neither knowing how to explain what they were feeling. But something had begun, quiet, fragile, and real. The following day, Dami returned, not with flowers, but with umla and yudu from a roadside joint. Ife laughed for the first time in weeks. You brought food for the food seller, she joked. Just because you sell, it doesn't mean you always get to eat it, Dami replied. They shared the meal in the hospital lounge. She told him about her life, how her mother died, how Benga disappeared, how Lagos swallowed her dreams. Dami, in turn, revealed only parts of his story. He didn't mention the cancer yet, but he told her about his mother's death and how it broke him. They didn't cry. They didn't pity each other. They just listened, and sometimes that was enough. As he dropped her off at the clinic that evening, she placed her hand on his arm. Thank you, Dami. You've done more for me in 2 days than most people did in years. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and said, Don't give up. You hear me? No matter what happens. But deep inside, Dami knew he had already started to give himself a reason to live. For the next 2 weeks, Dami kept returning to the hospital like a man possessed, not by love or lust, but by a strange hunger for peace. Every time he saw Ife smile, something inside him softened. He found himself talking less about pain and more about possibilities. He even stopped using pills, not by force, but by desire. At first, the withdrawal symptoms were mild. Headaches, cold sweats, agitation. But by day 4, it became hell. He vomited until he collapsed. His vision blurred. His muscles twitched violently. The temptation to return to codeine, to one last puff of weed, to something, anything, to dull the ache became unbearable. But he held on. Every time he felt like dying, he remembered Ife's words, Don't give up. She had no idea she was fighting for him in ways even he couldn't describe. He didn't tell her about the cancer yet. He didn't want to see pity in her eyes. For now, he just wanted to be the man she thought he was, kind, strong, dependable, even if it was a lie. Meanwhile, Ife's health improved. Her baby was kicking more. Her skin was glowing. The nurses began to joke that she had a secret lover, but she laughed it off. She didn't know what to call Dami. He wasn't her man. He wasn't her savior. He was just there, consistent, quiet, real. They took walks in the hospital compound, shared jokes, and listened to old Niger songs on a small Bluetooth speaker he brought. Ife began to dream again, small dreams. A small apartment, a clean kitchen, a bed for her child. It wasn't much, but it was hope. She told Dami one afternoon, I used to believe my life was cursed. But now I'm starting to think maybe God was just waiting for the right chapter. He didn't reply. He just held her hand gently. The first time he'd touched anyone with affection in years. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A connection built not on romance or promises, but on mutual pain and survival. But even beautiful moments come with shadows. Dami's nightmares returned. Dreams of dying, alone. Visions of his father laughing over his grave. Flashes of his mother crying blood. He began writing a journal at 2 a.m. every night, pouring out everything he couldn't say aloud. If I die tomorrow, at least I died trying to be a better man, he scribbled one night. Yet, despite the fear and the ticking clock of his cancer, he no longer wanted to end it all. Ife had unknowingly planted a seed, a desire to fight, to endure, to maybe even hope. And though he hadn't told her yet, Dami made a promise to himself. Before his time ran out, he would do something meaningful. Something that proved he wasn't just a senator's disappointment. He would become a man worth remembering, not by the world, but by one woman and one child who once had nothing, but who now had him. It started with shaking hands. Dami couldn't hold his cup of tea without spilling it. Then came the night sweats, the nightmares, and the random body cramps. His entire body seemed to be revolting against his decision to stay clean. The codeine, the tramadol, the cannabis, they were demons that didn't leave without a fight. On some nights, he woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, with tears streaming down his face. Yet, he never told Ife. He didn't want her to see him as weak. To her, he was Dami, the quiet, kind man who brought food and listened with compassion. But inside he was at war. He had flushed the last of his drugs down the toilet, locked himself inside for 2 days, and screamed through every withdrawal wave. He wrote letters he never sent, prayed prayers he didn't believe in, and once even crawled on the cold floor whispering his mother's name. He thought of going back, just one pill, one puff. But then he remembered Ife's laugh, her strength, her story. If she could endure hunger, abandonment, and still smile, he could endure this. Outside, the world continued to test him. Social media blogs had caught wind of his disappearance. Senator's son missing again, one headline screamed. His father's aides began hunting him down discreetly, but Dami had removed all tracking. He didn't want to be found, not yet. He needed to finish this journey himself. But one afternoon, as he walked out of the hospital compound where Ife was still staying, a man approached him, rough-skinned, scar across his jaw, and eyes full of mischief. "Oga, no vex. You dey help that pregnant girl, ABI." Dami blinked. "Who are you?" The man grinned. "I just want warn you say that girl, and she done chop plenty people. Nah, weddin' she dey do. Use bell hold man." Before Dami could respond, the man vanished into the crowd. It was the kind of threat that didn't come with shouting, just subtle poison meant to plant out. That night, Dami couldn't sleep. He hated how much the words affected him. He didn't want to doubt Ife, but the streets had a way of dragging innocence through mud. While Dami battled addiction and whispers, Ife faced her own demons. Her former landlord returned to her kiosk late one evening, furious that she had been gone for days without paying rent. "When you think say this be? You day hospital day enjoy while I day wait for rent," he barked, grabbing her small bag of clothes. She tried to explain her situation, that she was recovering and needed just one more week. But he slapped the bag from her hand and threatened to throw her things in the gutter. She burst into tears, sitting by the roadside like a defeated soul. That night, she slept outside the hospital, her belly wrapped in a shawl, mosquitoes biting her skin. She didn't call Dami. Pride wouldn't let her. The next morning, when he saw her sleeping near the compound gate, his heart shattered. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Because you've already done enough," she whispered. "And I don't want to be a burden." In that moment, Dami made a silent vow. He would not just help her survive. He would give her a new life. Whatever it took. Senator Chief Adekunle sat behind his mahogany desk, scanning through a report his media advisor had printed off Twitter. Senator's son seen with street pregnant girl. Is Dami dating a hawker? He clenched his jaw, his knuckles tightening around the page. It wasn't the shame that made his heart boil. It was the timing. His gubernatorial campaign was just weeks away. He had worked for decades to build an image of strength, dignity, and class. Now his only son, a drug addict with a death wish, had resurfaced in the arms of a roadside hawker. He slammed the paper down and picked up his phone. "Find him," he barked at his security team. "I don't care how. Track him. Drag him if you must. And bring that girl too. I want to see the face of the witch who's distracting my son." He had no interest in her story. To him, Ife was a parasite, a poor girl who had latched onto his son during his weakest moment. But this wasn't just about Dami anymore. It was about his reputation. 2 days later, the confrontation happened like an explosion. Dami returned to his flat to find his father sitting in the living room, flanked by 2 bodyguards. "You look like hell," the senator sneered. Dami dropped his keys, unfazed. "And you still look like a man who buried his soul under politics." The tension thickened. "Who is she?" the senator barked. "This pregnant girl I keep hearing about. What's she doing with my son?" Dami smiled bitterly. "She's doing what you never did. She listens. She cares. She saved me." "Saved you from what?" his father shouted. "From being a disappointment? From turning into this junky mess." That was when Dami snapped. He launched across the room and punched his father in the jaw. The guards moved, but the senator waved them off. Blood dripped from his lip as he glared at his son. "You think she loves you? Wait till she sees your will. Wait till she sees the cancer diagnosis." Dami's heart sank. How did he know? The senator wiped his mouth. You don't know pain yet, Damilola. But you will. When his father finally left, Dami collapsed into the couch, breathing heavily. That confrontation had awakened something dormant, anger mixed with pain, but also courage. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a helpless child under his father's shadow. He felt like a man. He picked up his phone and dialed Ife. "I need to tell you something," he said. She could hear the tension in his voice. "Are you okay?" "Not really," he said. "But I think I'm finally ready to be honest." That night, Dami met her under the mango tree outside the hospital. He looked into her eyes and whispered, "I have cancer. Stage 4. Ife froze. Her eyes widened. Her lips trembled. But she didn't cry. She stepped forward, took his hand, and said, "Then we'll fight it. Together." Dami stared at her, a girl with nothing but hope, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real, quiet, humbling peace. It was 2:17 a.m. when the nightmare returned. Only this time, it wasn't a dream. Dami gasped for air, his throat burning, his chest tightening. He rolled off the couch and crawled toward the kitchen, knocking down a chair on the way. Sweat drenched his body, and every inch of him screamed for relief. His vision blurred. His head throbbed. He tried to stand but fell again. This was different from withdrawal. It was something worse. He barely managed to grab his phone, and with shaky fingers, he dialed Ife. When she picked up and heard his shallow breathing, she panicked. "Dami, where are you?" I can't breathe," he whispered. "Please." She didn't wait. She ran from the hospital compound, barefoot, hailed a Kiki, and reached his apartment in 15 minutes. When she saw him on the floor, pale and twitching, she screamed for help. Neighbors poured in, and together they rushed him to the emergency ward of the same hospital he had taken her to just days ago. The doctors moved swiftly. Oxygen masks, injections, monitors beeping. Ife stood outside the glass room, clutching her belly, praying aloud in Igbo. "Chukwubaiko, don't take him. Don't take him now." She refused to sit, refused to rest. She kept pacing, weeping silently, bargaining with God. After nearly 2 hours, the doctor finally came out. "We stabilized him, but the cancer is spreading. His lungs are weakening. We need to start a more aggressive treatment immediately." Ife nodded. "Do whatever it takes." She sat by his bedside as he slept, gently brushing his hair, whispering lullabies like a mother to a child. The room smelled of antiseptic, but to her it was a battlefield, and she refused to lose. When he opened his eyes around 6 a.m. and saw her sitting there, he whispered, "Why are you still here?" She smiled through tears. "Because you stayed for me when no one else did. I'm not leaving you now." From that day on, Ife became his shadow. She cooked for him, read to him, sat through his chemo sessions. Even when he vomited blood and cursed the world, she stayed. Her own pregnancy became a side story to nurses. They began calling her the wife, though no one had proposed anything yet. The other patients admired their bond. One old woman said, "Now love like this day cast out death." Dami began to fight harder, not just for himself, but for her and for the child she carried. He asked questions. He showed up for treatment. He laughed sometimes, not because he was healed, but because he was no longer alone. And sometimes in life, that's the beginning of every miracle. In the days that followed Dami's collapse, something delicate but undeniable began to bloom between him and Ife. It wasn't loud or flashy. There were no romantic declarations, no Instagram captions or surprise gifts. It was in the way she placed a wet towel on his forehead when his fever spiked. It was in how he reached for her hand, silently, every time the chemotherapy drip started. It was in the shared glances, the exchanged smiles, the comfort of presence. The hospital staff noticed it before they did. Even the cleaner once said, "Wouldn't it be husband and wife already, no." Ife laughed and brushed it off, but deep inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Seen, valued, and safe. Dami, too, began to experience peace in pockets of his pain. He found himself telling her stories he had never shared, about how he once ran away from boarding school just to see his late mother, about how he used to write poetry under the mango tree before drugs took over. She listened, always, without judgment. And that made all the difference. One afternoon, they sat outside, under a tree, within the hospital compound. The harmattan breeze blew gently. Dammy wore a cap to hide his thinning hair, and Ife had her swollen feet stretched out on a small stool. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. But when Dammy suddenly said, "I'm scared," she turned to him slowly. "Of dying?" she asked. He nodded. "But not just that. I'm scared of being forgotten, of having lived a life that didn't count." Ife took his hand and placed it over her belly. "You already saved me. If nothing else, my child will grow up knowing the man who gave his mother hope." Dammy's throat tightened. No one had ever made him feel that his existence mattered, not even his family. He looked at her, tears threatening his eyes. "Why are you like this? Why do you care so much?" She smiled. "Because someone once told me not to give up. I listened." That day, they didn't kiss. They didn't hug. But their hearts moved closer than ever before. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Dammy realized something profound. He didn't want to die anymore. Not just for her. Not just for the child. But for himself. For the first time in years, he wanted to fight. He wanted to live. He began to make plans, scribbling ideas for a youth rehab foundation, imagining a space where broken people like him could heal. He even made a note to talk to a friend from university who now worked in media. Ife became his anchor, but she also reignited his purpose. It wasn't about escaping death anymore. It was about finding meaning before the clock ran out. And in the soft darkness of that hospital room, a broken senator's son began rebuilding his soul, not with wealth or connections, but with the fragile, stubborn power of love. The peace they had built shattered one morning like a cracked mirror. A gossip blog with over 1 million followers posted an anonymous photo of Dammy and Ife sitting under the hospital tree. The caption read, "Senator's cancerous son dating pregnant hawker. Clout or true love?" The post went viral within minutes. People reposted, mocked, and dissected their story with brutal glee. Some called Ife a gold digger. Others labeled Dammy a disgrace. "How can a whole senator's son fall this low?" one tweet read. Another said, "Nah juju, she used catcham. She don't bind him well." Dammy woke up to his phone buzzing with hundreds of notifications. Calls from reporters, texts from old friends, messages from people who hadn't cared in years. But what struck him most was the message from his father. "I warned you. This embarrassment ends today." The word stung, but not as much as the realization that even now, his father cared more about headlines than his son's life. Ife was the last to know. A nurse showed her the post while they were changing her for. She read the comments slowly, each one hitting her like a slap. "Olasho in disguise. Watch her run when the boy dies. These girls no get shame." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry in front of them. She simply nodded, thanked the nurse, and walked to the hospital garden alone. When Dammy found her, she was sitting on the same bench where they first spoke about pain. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting beside her. "This is my fault." She shook her head. "No, it's the world's fault. For believing that someone like me doesn't deserve someone like you." Dammy clenched his fists. He had tried to shield her, protect their space. But the world didn't care. The world fed on gossip, not grace. That night, he made a decision. He wouldn't let this go unanswered. The next morning, dressed in a simple white kaftan with a black cap, Dammy walked into a private radio studio in Acacia. A friend from university had arranged an exclusive interview. When asked about the scandal, he looked straight into the camera and said, "That woman you're mocking saved my life. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't know who I was. She just showed up the way I wish my family had. She's not a hawker. She's not a mistake. She's my miracle." The video clip spread like wildfire. People were stunned. Some apologized. Others still mocked. But Dammy didn't care anymore. That day, he reclaimed his story. Not as a senator's son. Not as a cancer patient. But as a man in love, raw, honest, and unashamed. The chaos outside didn't slow down, but inside the hospital, a different storm was building. one of blood, pain, and life. On the morning after Dammy's radio interview, Ife woke up with intense cramps. At first, she thought it was just stress, or maybe the spicy Ifo Riro she had eaten the night before. But when she stood up and felt a rush of warm fluid down her legs, she froze. "Dammy," she cried out. He came running, panic on his face. "It's time," she whispered, clutching her stomach. Nurses rushed in, a wheelchair was brought, and the hospital corridor suddenly turned into a war zone. Dammy paced the hallway, heart pounding. His body was still weak, but his mind was racing. He had faced withdrawal, chemo, even death, but nothing terrified him like this. Behind the doors, Ife screamed, fought, and pushed with all her might. She thought of her mother. She thought of Benga. She thought of every night she slept hungry, every slap, every insult. And she pushed harder. Meanwhile, the doctors surrounded Dammy's bed later, that evening, with furrowed brows. "The cancer is advancing again," the oncologist said. "His liver is showing signs of damage. We have to start a new regimen, but it's risky." Dammy nodded weakly. "Just keep me alive. That's all I ask." But his mind wasn't on death anymore, it was on Ife. On the life she was bringing into the world. On the child who would carry both their scars and their hopes. He tried to stand, but collapsed into the nurse's arms. "Let me see her," he whispered. "Please." Across the hospital wing, Ife finally pushed one last time and heard the shrill cry of a baby boy pierce the room. She burst into tears, not just of relief, but of triumph. The nurse placed the baby on her chest. "You did it," she whispered. Ife kissed the baby's forehead and murmured, "Obinna, you're my heart, my victory." Later that night, Dammy was wheeled into her room. He looked like a shadow of himself, pale, thin, and breathing slowly. But when he saw her holding their child, he smiled for the first time that day. She turned to him, eyes swollen with joy. "He's here," she said. Dammy nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. "And so am I." They held hands over the sleeping baby's body. 3 broken stories, now tied into one living proof of redemption. Outside, the world still shouted. Online gossip still brewed. But in that small hospital room, nothing else mattered. They had won a small war. And for now, that was enough. The following days in the hospital were a blur of beeping monitors, whispered prayers, and the rhythmic cry of a newborn. Ife barely slept every time her son stirred. Her body moved instinctively like a mother awakened by purpose. She named him Obinna, meaning father's heart, not because Benga, the man who abandoned her, was present, but because Dammy had stepped in and filled a void no one else dared to. Holding her child gave her a new kind of strength, one born not from survival, but from a sense of future. She looked at his tiny hands and wept silently, overwhelmed that despite everything, the hunger, the rejection, the abuse, she was still here. A mother, alive, whole. But with every sigh of joy, her eyes drifted to the room across the hall, where Dammy lay battling for his own breath. The doctors had tried a new chemotherapy cocktail, and though he was showing minor signs of response, his body was still weak, too weak. Yet he always asked about the baby, every single time. Dammy's world had changed the moment he heard Obinna's first cry. In that instant, something shifted in his soul, a whisper that said, "You're still needed here." He spent his days staring at the ceiling, imagining a future he wasn't sure he'd see. Would he teach the boy how to ride a bike? Would he read him bedtime stories? Would he be around long enough to see him call someone mama? But even amidst that uncertainty, Dammy fought harder. He endured the nausea, the headaches, the bone-deep fatigue. He read articles about survivors. He changed his diet, followed every medical instruction, and began speaking to a spiritual counselor recommended by Ife. In those quiet conversations, he finally allowed himself to grieve, not just for the cancer, but for his childhood, his mother, and the years wasted in addiction. One night, after a particularly painful episode, he whispered to himself, "I don't want to just live. I want to love fully, freely, forever." And love, in its purest form, was what Ife offered him. She bathed his wounds without flinching, sat by him for hours humming old lullabies, and read the Psalms to him like his mother once did. One day, as she wheeled Obinna into his room and placed the baby in Dami's arms. Something sacred passed between them. Dami looked down at the child and saw a second chance. "He doesn't have my blood," he said softly, "but I feel like he has my soul." Ife reached for his hand. "That's what makes you his father." Dami's eyes welled up, but he didn't let the tears fall. Instead, he kissed the baby's forehead and whispered, "You saved me, little man. You and your mother. And I won't let you down." From that day, Dami stopped thinking about death and began preparing for life, one that included diapers, devotion, and decisions he never imagined himself capable of making. The recovery process wasn't swift, but it was visible. Dami began to gain a little weight again. His skin, once pale and dry, slowly began to regain color. He took short walks with Ife and baby Obinna within the hospital courtyard, now drawing smiles from other patients and even the staff. People who once gossiped about the senator's cursed son now watched in admiration as he greeted others warmly, encouraged fellow patients, and read out children's books to Obinna while hooked up to a drip. Dami had transformed, not just physically, but in spirit. His pain had refined him, and as he healed, he started putting pen to paper. He began outlining a plan for a youth-focused rehabilitation and wellness center, not just for addicts like him, but for young people who needed a place to find purpose. No politics, no religion, just healing, he wrote in bold at the top of the proposal. It was his way of giving back, of turning his suffering into someone else's survival. Ife watched this transformation with awe. She remembered the broken man who had stumbled toward her in traffic that day, looking like he didn't want to live. And now, here he was, a fighter, a visionary, a father. Their bond deepened with each passing hour. At night, after Obinna fell asleep, they would sit together outside the ward, wrapped in shawls, talking about everything, from the kind of school they wanted for Obinna to the street vendors she used to sell with. One evening, she told Dami how she once slept under a bridge for 2 nights when her kiosk was locked up. "I wrapped myself in nylon," she laughed. "But I was more worried about rats than the cold." Dami looked at her, eyes glistening. "You're the strongest person I know." She shook her head. "No, I just didn't have a choice." He took her hand gently and said, "You gave me a choice. You gave me a reason. And that's stronger than anything I've ever seen." News of Dami's improved health and public reappearance spread like wildfire. Journalists wanted interviews. NGOs reached out. But what shocked the nation most was a video he posted online one Sunday morning. A shaky but heartfelt recording made from his hospital bed. "My name is Damilola Adekunle. I used to be addicted to codeine, to pain, to shame. I used to hate life. But I'm still here. And I want to say this. Love is not always perfect or pretty, but it saves. It saved me." Within hours, the video trended across platforms. People who had once mocked him now flooded his page with messages of encouragement. He ended the video by turning the camera toward Ife and Obinna, both asleep beside him. "This is my family," he said, voice cracking, "and I will spend the rest of my days protecting them." Unknown to Ife, he had already purchased a ring, small and simple. It wasn't flashy, but it carried the weight of a man reborn. Dami didn't wait for the perfect moment. Life had taught him that time wasn't promised. So on a breezy Saturday morning, as Ife stood rocking Obinna on the hospital veranda, Dami limped out of his ward, a small black box tucked in his pocket. He wore a white senator-style outfit, one his mother had sewn for him years ago, one of the few things he still had of hers. A few hospital staff stood nearby, smiling knowingly. Dami took a deep breath, walked up to Ife, and said, "You saved my life when I was ready to end it. You held me when I was broken. And you gave me a son I didn't know I needed. Ifeoma, please make me the happiest man in this broken world. Be my wife." Ife gasped. Her hands trembled. Obinna gurgled in her arms, as if blessing the moment. She dropped to her knees, weeping, unable to speak. Dami knelt beside her. "I don't need a big wedding. I just need you." She nodded through tears. Yes. 1,000,000 times, yes. The wedding was not held in a cathedral. It was not covered by Belenija or broadcast on Channels TV. It happened right there in the slum where Ife once sold food. Her old friends from the market brought rice and mwamwa. Mama Iridi helped organize plastic chairs and white fabric. Dami's security detail, once assigned to monitor him, now served as ushers. Even his oncologist showed up in native attire, smiling with tears in his eyes. Dami and Ife stood hand in hand as a local pastor prayed over them. "This is not just a marriage," he declared. "It is a resurrection. Two souls who were lost, now found. May their union shame the devil and silence every voice that doubted them." As they exchanged vows, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing them in golden light. Dami kissed her with trembling lips. The crowd erupted in cheers. Children danced. Music played. And for the first time in his life, Dami didn't feel like a senator's son. He felt like a man, deeply loved and truly alive. Later that night, as they returned to the hospital with Obinna in his car seat and blessings echoing in their hearts, Dami turned to his new wife. "Do you believe in miracles now?" he asked. Ife rested her head on his shoulder. "I've been living one since the day you stopped that convoy." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then let's live the rest of our lives like one." Behind them, the slum they left cheered their name. Ahead of them, the road was uncertain. But for the first time, it didn't matter. Because love, the real, stubborn, imperfect kind, had found them, healed them, and made them whole again. After their wedding, Dami and Ife moved into a modest bungalow in the outskirts of Surulere, far from the political mansions and glittering estates Dami had grown up in. It was a quiet space, surrounded by trees, with peeling paint and the scent of fresh rain lingering in the air. It wasn't perfect. The roof leaked sometimes, and the generator rattled like an old man coughing, but it was theirs. For the first time in his life, Dami didn't wake up to silence or servants. He woke up to Ife humming in the kitchen, to baby Obinna's cries echoing down the hallway, to peace. He spent his days writing proposals for his foundation, while Ife nursed Obinna and managed the small food delivery service she had started from their kitchen. She called it Ife's Pot of Hope, and it served local meals to hospitals and schools in the area. They didn't make much, but the orders grew slowly, and her joy grew faster. Every meal she packed felt like a full-circle moment, once a hawker, now a business owner feeding others. Dami's vision took shape under the name, the Grace House Initiative. It wasn't just a rehab center. It was a community. A place for recovering addicts, ex-convicts, single mothers, and trauma survivors to find healing, learn skills, and rebuild their dignity. It started as an idea scribbled in his cancer journal, but quickly gained traction after his hospital video went viral. Volunteers offered their services. Doctors, therapists, counselors, even a few of his father's old political rivals reached out quietly with donations, moved by his transformation. But Dami refused to let the center become a publicity tool. "This is not a charity," he told one donor. "It's a resurrection site, and I won't let it be polluted." They held the first group therapy session under a mango tree, with just 6 people. By the end of the week, 22 more had joined. Ife sat beside him during every meeting, often with Obinna on her lap, telling her story without shame. Her presence made people open up. Her strength gave others permission to be vulnerable. Together, they created a space where no one felt alone anymore. Yet with every step forward, the past still lurked like a shadow. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, Dami opened his email and found a message from a senator's aide. It read, "The chief requests a private audience with you and your wife." At first, Dami ignored it. But a week later, another message came, and this time, it was signed with a name he couldn't dismiss, your father. Ife urged him to meet the senator. "Not for his sake," she said, "but for yours. Closure heals more than time." Dami agreed reluctantly. When they arrived at the senator's mansion in Ikoyi, they expected scorn, anger, or even mockery. But what they saw instead stunned them. The once proud senator sitting alone, thinner, older, with sorrow in his eyes. As they entered, he stood, walked toward Ife, and without warning, knelt before her. "I judged you without knowing you," he said, voice trembling. "And I nearly lost my son, because of my pride. Please forgive me." Silence filled the room. Dami looked at Ife, unsure. But she stepped forward, lifted the old man up, and whispered, "Grace forgives what pride cannot." It took time, but the rift between father and son began to heal. Not perfectly, but authentically. The senator started attending the foundation's events quietly, sitting at the back in dark glasses and an agbada that no longer fit like it used to. At first, he didn't speak. He just listened. He heard a 16-year-old girl talk about surviving molestation, watched a boy barely 20 cry over losing both parents to drug abuse, and witnessed his son stand before a crowd and say, "I was broken, addicted, ashamed, but I am still here." Slowly, the senator's icy exterior began to melt. One day, he approached a recovering addict who had relapsed and said, "You can rise again. I know someone who did." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Behind closed doors, he confessed to Dami one evening, "Your mother would have been proud. I wasn't the father you deserved." Dami didn't reply. He just nodded, placed his hand on his father's shoulder, and said, "Then let's build something she would have loved." In that moment, pain didn't vanish, but it made space for healing. Meanwhile, Ife's food business blossomed. A former hospital matron introduced her to a small school, where she began supplying daily meals. The children loved her mwah. The teachers loved her discipline. Soon, she expanded and hired 2 women from a foundation, both single mothers who had once slept on the streets like she had. "I don't want pity," she told a journalist who came to cover her story. "I want partnership. I want progress." Obinna became the face of her brand. His toothless smile printed on the takeaway packs with the words, "Born of strength, served with love." Their small house in Suralere became a hub of activity. Volunteers, cooks, friends, journalists, and children always coming and going. But every night, no matter how busy they got, Dami and Ife made time to sit outside with Obinna and talk about their dreams. Some nights they planned a school. Other nights, they just held each other and thanked God for one more day. Then came the miracle no one expected. After a routine test at the hospital, Dami sat with his oncologist, bracing for bad news. But the doctor smiled and said, "Your blood work looks different. The cancer markers are reducing. The new therapy is working, even better than we hoped." Dami blinked, stunned. "So, I have more time." The doctor nodded. "You might have more than just time. You might have a future." Dami walked out of that hospital room and dropped to his knees in the hallway, weeping like a child. He had braced for death so many times. He never imagined life could still be his portion. He ran home, hugged Ife so tight she couldn't breathe, and whispered, "I'm not dying. I'm living." They both fell to the floor, laughing and crying at once, while Obinna clapped joyfully, unaware of the storm that had just passed. That night, Dami lit a candle for his mother and wrote in his journal, "Goodbye, pain. Thank you for teaching me. But you no longer live here." In a move that stunned the nation, Senator Chief Adekunle announced at a press conference that he was stepping down from politics. "Nigeria doesn't need another politician," he said. "It needs fathers, mentors, people who listen. I spent 30 years chasing power. I want to spend the rest of my days healing what I broke, starting with my family." The media went into a frenzy. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others speculated about hidden scandals. But those closest to him knew the truth. The man had been changed by love, by humility, and by watching his son do what he, with all his power, could not. Within weeks, the senator launched a new project in Ife's name, the Ifeoma Women's Hospital, designed to support pregnant women in poverty, especially those abandoned by partners. At the opening ceremony, he stood beside Ife with tears in his eyes and said, "I once saw this woman as a mistake. Today, I see her as a miracle." Dami stood at the back during the launch, holding Obinna, heart swelling with pride. He had watched both the woman he loved and the man who raised him become something greater than their pasts. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been layered with betrayal, shame, judgment, and pain. But somehow, grace had found them all. After the ribbon was cut, a journalist approached Dami and asked, "How do you explain everything that's happened? The love, the healing, the recovery." Dami smiled and looked toward Ife, who was now holding a baby of another young mother at the center. I stopped my convoy to save her, he said, but she was the one who saved me. Sometimes Grace wears a tired gown and sells rice in traffic. Sometimes love comes from the very place you least expect. The story went viral again. But this time, the headlines weren't filled with shame. They were soaked in hope. Back at home, as they sat down for dinner, Dami looked around the table, Ife feeding Obinna, two new staff chatting in the kitchen, and a small photo of his late mother beside a candle on the shelf. He stood up, raised his glass of Zobo, and said, "To love. Not the perfect kind, but the kind that stays, that fights, that forgives." Ife raised her glass, smiling. "To grace, that finds us where we fall and teaches us to rise." They clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, Dami no longer feared tomorrow, because he had seen what love could do. He had lived to tell the story, and with Ife by his side, he knew the best chapters were still ahead. Years had passed since that unforgettable day Dami stopped his convoy at the roadside, unknowingly stepping into his own rebirth. The story had become folklore in parts of Lagos, a wealthy senator's son, sick and suicidal, who changed the course of his life by helping a pregnant food seller. Some embellished the tale, others turned it into spoken word poetry, but the truth remained in the hearts of those who witnessed it unfold. Dami had become more than a survivor. He was a symbol of hope. His foundation, Grace House Initiative, had expanded into 3 states, with branches in Enugu, Ibadan, and Abuja. Thousands of lives had been touched, not just addicts, but broken families, abandoned women, depressed teenagers, and even elderly men who felt they had nothing left to live for. Every person who walked into Grace House was told the story of a man who found purpose by lifting someone else, and it never failed to inspire. Ife, now affectionately called Mama Grace by many, had grown into her own legend. Her food business had turned into a chain of kitchens and feeding centers, employing over 50 women, most of them once homeless or abandoned like she had been. She trained them personally, teaching not just recipes, but resilience. In schools and conferences, she was invited to speak, not as a motivational speaker, but as a voice for the forgotten. Her humility remained intact, even as the praise came. "I didn't save anyone," she would always say. "God used love to save both of us." Obinna, now a smart, talkative 5-year-old, often ran around the Grace House compound with a toy stethoscope, announcing that he wanted to be a doctor for hearts like daddy's. One day, during a school event, he stood on stage and proudly declared, "My daddy didn't just heal, he helped the world heal too." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. And as for Dami, he remained quietly grounded. He never returned to politics, despite constant pressure and invitations. "I'm already building a nation," he'd say, one soul at a time. He continued mentoring young men personally, and often took solo trips to slums, parks, and nightclubs, places where his old self might have once gotten lost. There he would sit with strangers, share his story, and remind them that no life was too far gone. One evening, during a televised interview, the host asked, "What changed everything for you?" Dami leaned forward and said, "I stopped my convoy to help someone. But in truth, I was the one being saved." Grace doesn't always come dressed in white robes. Sometimes it wears an old wrapper, carries a food tray, and still finds the strength to smile. "That day, I didn't just meet a girl. I met my beginning." That quote would go on to be printed on the entrance gate of Grace House, etched into stone as a reminder that love's greatest miracles are often born from the most unexpected interruptions. On a calm Saturday morning, the sun cast a golden hue over the streets of Lagos, and a convoy not of politicians or celebrities, but of volunteers, recovering addicts, teenage mothers, and children, slowly marched through the city, holding placards that read, "There is hope." It was the 5th anniversary of Grace House Initiative, and Dami had organized the walk to celebrate lives reclaimed from addiction, shame, and poverty. Ife walked beside him hand in hand, with Obinna bouncing excitedly beside them in a Grace House t-shirt. They marched through Abilend, the very same road where she once hawked rice and collapsed in the sun. People lined the streets, cheering and clapping. Some remembered her. Nah, she be dat girl way day sell food for here the year, a woman shouted. She done turn madam now. Ife smiled warmly, her heart full. She looked at the dusty spot where she once fainted and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. From nothing, God had built everything. They stopped near that spot, and Dammy addressed the crowd. I came here once broken, dying, angry, he began, his voice steady. And I met a woman who didn't just feed my hunger, she fed my spirit. She believed in me when I couldn't even look in a mirror. I want you to know that hope is not a myth. It lives. It breathes. And sometimes it sells food by the roadside. The crowd erupted in cheers. He turned to Ife, took her hand, and pulled Obinna close. I don't know how long I have in this life. None of us do. But every day I get, I'll spend it telling someone else, you matter. You are not too broken. You can still rise. That day, they unveiled a statue at the newly completed Grace House headquarters, not of Dammy, not of his father, but of Ife. It showed her in a wrapper and head tie, holding a food tray with her hand outstretched. The plaque beneath read, "To the woman who turned pain into purpose." Ife cried quietly as Dammy held her, whispering, "You deserve more than the world can ever give." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Dammy, Ife, and Obinna sat together in front of their home in Surulere. Obinna played with a toy truck on the porch. Dammy leaned back in his chair, holding Ife's hand, his eyes gazing at the fading sky. "Do you ever think of what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day?" he asked softly. Ife smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You did. That's all that matters." He nodded, his heart full. "I was on my way to die," he whispered, "but God sent you to make me live again." She kissed his cheek. "And now you're helping others live too." They sat in silence, wrapped in gratitude, as the last light of day disappeared. And as darkness fell, their home glowed with laughter, warmth, and the kind of joy that comes only after surviving the storm. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, a real Nigerian love story born of pain, healed by grace, and crowned by an ever after written in the streets of Lagos. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.